Good afternoon. My name is Paul Gore with the Asian Chamber of Commerce. I'm the Director of Community Development for the Chamber in Houston, and so thank you for joining us today. We're excited to have a wonderful webinar to kick off 2022 in providing necessary information and guidelines affecting your business and employees. Serving Houston's business community for over 32 years, our mission is to foster economic and business development opportunities through the programs like this that we're having today. And we hope that you find us helpful in understanding the recent Supreme Court ruling about the vaccination mandate for your business and how it affects you and help making good decisions and keeping you, your employees, and customers safe. But before we continue with this event, I'm going to like to invite Kenneth Lee, our board chair, to be able to say a few words. Kenneth? You're muted. While Kenneth's coming on board, if you can just unmute.
All right, thank you, Paul. Sorry about the technical problem.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to welcome everybody, and then Happy New Year, and also Happy Lunar New Year next week. So you can see I dress up as a traditional Lunar New Year festival costume. But I think I want to thank our staff, to arrange this meeting, especially our national partners and sponsor, ACE, and then Janet, and also want to thank today's speaker, Earvin, and then to give us the talk about the reason about COVID-19, especially regarding to the employee law. I think we're going to give you a warm introduction. So thanks everyone to take this opportunity, and again wish that we have a great meeting today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenneth. I appreciate just the warm word. And he is our new board chair for 2022-2023, so we thank you. Next week, I want to invite Janet LLP from National ACE, who's our strong partners in helping pushing programs like this to provide a few words. Janet?
Thank you, Paul. Hello and happy Lunar New Year to everyone here. My name is Janet LLP, and I'm the Program and Business Development Director of the National Asian Pacific Islander American Chamber of Commerce and Entrepreneurship. I know it's a long name. We're also known as National ACE, and we're purposefully headquartered in Washington, D.C. I wanted to take a quick moment to thank our chamber partner, Asian Chamber of Commerce, and our counterparts, Paul Gore, Barbara Gallo, and our board chair, Kenneth Lee, for being such a large source of support for us in the AAPI business community in Houston. Just to share a little bit about National ACE, we represent the interests of over 2 million AAPI small business owners and entrepreneurs, and we assist AAPI small businesses. And so National ACE also collaborates with close to 100 affiliate minority chamber partners and organizations across the country. In response to the current issues in our AAPI business community, we established AAPI Strong, a virtual technical assistance program that assists small businesses with access to capital and capacity building. This program also delivers training for AAPI businesses to react and report promptly in crisis situations, conduct national surveys to assess the consequences of hate, prejudice, and bias on our minority businesses, and organizing monthly roundtable discussions with government officials, lawmakers, corporate executives, and small business leaders to discuss ways for creating long-lasting solutions. Last year, National ACE provided over 16,000 small businesses with virtual webinars and trainings, as well as distributing over $2 million in microgrants to 223 owned AAPI small businesses. This funding was critical in giving our small businesses a lifeline during these difficult economic times. In 2022, we anticipate continuing the growth of our AAPI Strong initiative to service so many more AAPI small businesses across the country, but our success cannot be based on our efforts alone. We urge everyone in the business community to be an ally, stay up to date on policies, spread information through your connections to ensure that our AAPI business community's well-being remains a priority for policymakers and other community advocates. This Lunar New Year reflects National ACE's ongoing dedication to the vitality of diverse traditions, strengthening our business relationships, and building a more prosperous future. We're proud to continue this year's celebration with ACC Houston, and we praise our AAPI business owners for being brave, competitive, and confident, which represents the character of the Year of the Tiger. Stay in touch with us at National ACE by checking out our website at nationalace.org or aapistrong.com. I will put that in the chat. And thank you so much. We hope you learned from today's presenter, Earvin Chionglo from Nguyen Chen LLP. Thanks so much.
Janet, thank you so much. You're amazing, and the national support from National ACE. We appreciate just being able to be standing behind our community and business owners. I just want to just kind of transition to give you some highlights as we just go on, just to be very short, because we have a lot to cover today. Tomorrow, just a reminder that we have an in-person networking event. It's our annual Lunar New Year networking event. It's one of the more popular events that we have to celebrate at Chiao's in the Asia town. That's going to happen at 5:30 to 7:30. We hope that you can come here, meet other members, as well as some of our board members who will be there. So we hope to see you there tomorrow, as well as our orientation that we have next week. It's one way to understand the benefits of the chamber, how you can get involved, what are the aspects of programs that we have in 2022, and really maximize your benefits. So we ask that you really come, enjoy, and learn about the chamber and what we're doing in 2022. So I want to just kind of follow up with housekeeping items so that you are well aware. We're going to have this presentation. We're going to be muting all the mics and disabling your mics so that please feel free to submit your questions in the chat box, and I'll address them on your behalf during the Q&A sessions at the end. Please pay close attention to this, as this is something that we can help you really understand the aspect of how to really safeguard your employees and really just what's your rights as business owners in that perspective. If you're representing press, please disconnect now. This webinar is meant for small business owners. Please contact the Chamber office for direct and related information. So with that, I'm just pleased to announce our wonderful speaker, Earvin Chionglo, partner at Nguyen Chen LLP in the Houston area. They're wonderful chamber members as well. He's born in the Philippines and has really moved back into the US in 1996, graduated as valedictorian from his high school, and really had an interesting journey of studying biochemistry, but then now practicing law. And this is the whole aspect of immigration law and employment law. No, sorry, forgive me about immigration, employment laws and the whatnots in that perspective. But I want to just welcome you to Earvin. He has a lot in store for us today to talk about guidance and how you can really be able to safeguard your whole employee and workforce. Earvin, I'm going to pass it on to you. I'm going to stop the share screen so that you can be able to do that.
Okay, thank you, Paul, for that warm introduction. Let me just go ahead and share my screen, and we can get started. Okay. Just 1 second.
We see your screen. Thank you.
Screen? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And just as a reminder, the information provided in this presentation today does not constitute legal advice. All information, content, and materials provided here are for general information purposes only. So the chamber has asked me to kind of give a informational session and some updates with regards to the OSHA emergency temporary standard and the latest Supreme Court ruling that's, well, basically put a stop on the OSHA's and President's mandate on vaccines for large employers. Besides that, I'll be talking about common issues that employees and employers face during this time of COVID, and provide you with some guidelines and some immigration implications to the latest, I guess, events and issues that are going on today. So what was the ETS about? Essentially, the ETS, the Emergency Temporary Standard, was a result of President Biden's mandate or executive order, basically saying that they were going to require employers with 100 or more employees to get their employees vaccinated by January 4th, or require unvaccinated employees to produce negative tests on at least a weekly basis. Employers were also going to be required to pay for employees for the time it takes to get vaccinated and ensure that all unvaccinated employees are masked in the workplace. Other requirements under the ETS had to do with reporting and record keeping that's spelled out in the OSHA materials. This was issued on November 5th, 2021. And as many people expected, a lot of lawsuits ensued to challenge the mandate from the administration. Private employers, labor unions, state governments, and citizens across the US, they mounted legal challenges to the ETS. And on November 12th, 2021, the Fifth Circuit of the US Court of Appeals began an expedited review of the ETS. After that, there was essentially a lottery of who would get to hear the case on the appeals court level, and the Sixth Circuit of Appeals won the obligation to conduct a review of the many legal challenges across the nation about the ETS. Now, as many of you probably heard or saw, the Supreme Court recently held a ruling with regards to this OSHA mandate for vaccines. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court stayed the enforcement of the OSHA mandate for large employers. Stayed meaning basically the large employer mandate of 100 employees or more is not going to be upheld, or it's not going to pass. The voting for the 63, it basically went along the conservative and liberal lines of the Supreme Court, with the 3 liberal judges voting to dissent or voting to uphold the mandate, and 6 conservative judges voting to stop the mandates. On a more interesting note, there was another vote, 5-4, that upheld the mandate for Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services vaccination mandate. So basically, the centers or health facilities, healthcare workers that deal with Medicare and Medicaid services, they're still required to have vaccination mandates for their workers. This is interesting. The split vote, well, to me personally, is interesting because Justice Kavanaugh and Chief Justice Roberts went away from the normal lines of voting usually, and they went to the liberal wing to vote on this, to vote on approving the Medicare and Medicaid services vaccination mandates. That's interesting because it kind of shows that at least these 2 judges are more, I guess, more moderate than the other 3 conservative judges, and that kind of, or other 4, sorry, and that kind of gives a clue in the future, at least with possibly other challenges to mandates such as this, or any other legal ruling or legal case that's presented to them. That's it might not be a 6-3 decision every time there's a conservative versus liberal issue that's a court. Maybe the more moderate judges might sway one way or another. Now, what was the reasoning for the Supreme Court's ruling on the vaccine mandate? Essentially, the majority for Supreme Court ruled against the vaccine mandate because they felt that OSHA overstepped their boundaries in terms of what they were allowed to do under the statutes that governs OSHA. The reasoning was that OSHA is supposed to be mandating or supposed to be addressing hazards that are confined to the workplace only. However, COVID they distinguish is a day-to-day danger that everybody faces, not just at the workplace, kind of likening it to risks like crime and air pollution. The majority was willing to acknowledge that some workplaces might have an elevated risk for COVID transmission. So if OSHA were to come out later with more pointed and more kind of specific rules for more specific environments, then maybe they'll consider it and maybe they'll approve that type of mandate. But for this overbroad one, they felt that it was too overbroad and overstepping OSHA's boundaries. Basically, the majority was concerned that unelected officials in the OSHA agency are making decisions with a lot of implications that they felt should be made by more accountable and democratically voted officials. So in other words, the majority said if Congress wants to do something this big, something this overbroad, this sweeping across the nation, then Congress should be the one to make such a rule instead of OSHA. Like I said before, the majority was, very quick to add that if there's a more very specific OSHA rule for specific industries or specific environments, then they're more likely to take a look at it and visit it. But something like this, something that's overbroad, that's for 100 employees and doesn't have anything to do with a particular industry, then they're not likely going to pass any or approve any other mandates in the future that's kind of like that. Now, the three dissenters, the justices basically said in their dissent that OSHA doesn't, or the statute that governs OSHA doesn't really address or point out any distinctions between hazards that are confined to workplaces and those that exist outside it. This is interesting because, with Supreme Court cases, it's interesting to read dissents because sometimes what's a dissenting opinion early on becomes the majority opinion later down the road. So if there's a future challenge to this Supreme Court ruling, it would probably be something that the dissent outlines, which is, the statute doesn't really, define what's in the workplace versus what's outside. It's just, OSHA just says protect your employees. Now, with regards to the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services and why the majority voted to keep it, it's because they felt that the agency was acting through its authority to impose conditions on those type of facilities, because as many of y'all know, the government has a lot of rules with regards to companies that receive Medicare and Medicaid programs. They have a lot of steps that they need to do, and they've held higher standards for these services before, so it's not within, not outside the history for OSHA to have increased requirements such as this. And the majority also felt like the Medicare and Medicaid facilities, they do have higher occupational risk and risk more generally with regards to public health measures. So they felt that, in this case, it's okay to have this type of vaccine mandate. So what does this mean? So the current version of the ETS with the 100 employees and the vaccination and testing requirements is likely not going to pass any constitutional scrutiny or survive. I think that the Biden administration earlier on today basically announced that they're not going to move forward with this sort of mandate, but they still do encourage employers to essentially step up in terms of putting these types of restrictions or these types of regulations in their workplace, so that COVID-19 can be controlled in the local workplace. just as a review of the employer's responsibilities under OSHA, the employers have a responsibility to provide a safe workplace for your employees. You are supposed to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards, comply with standard rules and regulations with your industry. You're also required to examine workplace conditions and provide any safety training or PPE to your employees as may be needed. When you are having any OSHA-related incidents, you have to have certain record keeping, and you have obligations to report in case of certain events. And also under OSHA, you're not allowed to discriminate against employees or exercise their rights to report workplace violations, things like that. So just in a practical sense, what does this ruling mean for employers across the nation? Nothing in the Supreme Court's ruling prevents private employers from implementing their own mandatory vaccine policies to protect their employees, and their customers, vendors, and communities. The ruling just basically prevents the federal government from mandating such vaccine policies. Now, local and state mandates, they're still local cities, counties, states, they're still allowed to have their own mandates. And that kind of gives a lot of employers, especially if you have offices in multiple states around the country, it kind of gives you a little bit more difficulty in terms of knowing what needs to do, or what the company needs to do in terms of protecting their employees. I know that some states like California will usually have higher standards for employee protection than others. So it's very important, wherever you're located, to reach out to local council, or at least have your HR be up to date with states and local requirements, because they're still allowed to have them, even if the Supreme Court says the federal is not. Just as a note, there's no such mandate in Texas right now. Now, everybody knows the COVID-19 isn't going away anytime soon. And regardless of the outcome of the ETS with the Supreme Courts and any future permanent rule that may take its place, OSHA will still continue to use its authority under the General Duty Clause and hold companies and employers responsible for protecting their workers. What does this mean? This means that employers should continue to maintain policies to prevent the spread of COVID-19 and protect your employees. Now, I know a lot of employers, in anticipation of this ETS that they thought was going to pass, they may already have had plans or programs that they had in place to comply with the vaccination or weekly testing. They may have had to use a lot of resources to implement such a thing. And even with this ruling, they're still allowed to go forward with that program. Now, with others that were having trouble trying to figure out how to implement this type of program, with increased costs and things like that, I guess this ruling kind of brings them a considerable feeling of relief, because with the standard, if the ETS were to remain in place, they would have had increased costs. They would have had, I'm sure, a lot of exemption requests from their employees. And as many of y'all know, during December and Christmas, there was a lot of shortage of testing kits. It was difficult to find any COVID testing kits in stores or online. And if this ETS were to move forward before the Supreme Court ruled against it, there would have been a lot of shortage for testing kits. So even then, like I said, if you have a program that's already set in place for vaccination or testing, don't feel like you have to go away from it. You can take a look at your program, see if it's still something that's feasible, and you can go from there. Now, even if you don't have a requirement for vaccination, it doesn't mean that you are prevented from encouraging your employees to get vaccinated. There's been a lot of studies and a lot of surveys that show that employers were already thinking about establishing some sort of vaccination or masking or testing policy anyways. I saw that Harvard Business Review conducted a survey before, I believe in November, and employers were saying that about 13% of respondents said that the mandates led to employee resignations, while 13% reported that the mandates helped with employee recruitment or retention. So, I mean, that's just one survey or one study, but you may hear one side or the other, something, a mandate such as this, or testing requirements may cause you to lose employees, or, but it's just something to think about when you're considering this type of program. You may want to have your HR kind of gauge or, take a temperature of your employees, your workforce, to see what their feelings are with something such as this, and then you can move forward from there. But again, the most important thing to note is the Supreme Court doesn't prevent you, the employer, the private employer, from having your own vaccination or testing program. Another thing, just a practical matter, is that if you are trying to encourage vaccination amongst your employees, or you're trying to, let's say, you even have a requirement for your employees to get vaccinated or tested, you should have procedures in place to make it easy for your employees to get tested or to get vaccinated. And that might mean, giving some time off for them to have some time to get vaccinated, or maybe having your company purchase its own set of tests if it's available now. I know that our firm, we're looking into this sort of thing just to see how we can make it easier for our employees, because with the numbers that are going up right now, I mean, you can do all the preventative measures that you want, that you are implementing, but it doesn't mean that your employees aren't going to get COVID-19 anyways. So it's important to have a procedure in place now and to plan for it versus having to scramble later on when your employees, end up having catching COVID, and then you're kind of trying to prevent, the COVID-19 from spreading throughout your office, or trying to see what to do in terms of what do I give this employee in terms of time off or testing or things like that. So the earlier the better in terms of planning out your procedures. In terms of practical guidance for your office, you can reduce exposure through social distancing. And that may mean, having staggered schedules for people coming in the office, flexible schedules, remote work, limiting the number of employees that are able to go in the conference room or the break room, things like that. And there's ways to, for employers to nudge this type of behavior. So for example, in your lunchroom or break room, if you're limiting the number of people to be 10 or under, right? Maybe you just have 10 chairs in the room, or conference room only has supposed to have 4 people, maybe only have 4 chairs in there. Kind of make it easy on yourself and on your employees to practice social distancing. In terms of wearing masks, I know that CDC has a lot of rules, has a lot of guidance on when you can wear masks, when you don't have to wear masks and things like that. But there's also that overarching rule that says, CDC recommends wearing masks when indoors, whether or not you're vaccinated, if the community transmission is high or substantial. And I think Omicron fits that high or substantial community transmission right now. So just to follow CDC recommendation, you can go ahead and require masks when wearing indoors for your employees, unless they have exemptions for health reasons. Now, this is important, communicating exposures. Employers should make it a habit or have policy in place that encourages your employees to communicate their exposures, their symptoms, and be open with HR or your company as much as possible. What you don't want happening is your employees feeling like they're going to be punished or they're going to be in trouble if they, have COVID-19 or if they have symptoms related to COVID-19. So what ends up happening is they have symptoms or they have COVID-19, they come in the workplace anyways, and then it ends up spreading through your workforce, through your office, because employees felt like they were getting in trouble. You should always have an open door policy with regards to exposures and things like this, because it'll just be easier for you and your business. The worst case scenario is everybody in your office catches COVID and they're out for a week or 2 weeks, and your productivity plummets because everyone's out, and you don't want that. You should also encourage testing whenever possible, whenever they have symptoms. Like I mentioned before, if you're in a if you have financial resources to provide your employees with testing kits, and that would also make it easier for them to kind of get tested whenever they have symptoms. It's flu season right now, and many of y'all have children, and that children, they get sick in daycare and they bring it home, and the parents get sick and they have symptoms that are similar to COVID, but sometimes it's not COVID. So if you're able to have a test, just a test right at your office, or they're able to take a test at home and kind of confirm that it's not COVID, it'll make it easier for you in your productivity. Now, many of y'all probably remember last year and the requirement from the Families First Coronavirus Response Act that basically required the employers to provide paid time off for their employees whenever they have COVID or their relatives have COVID and things like that. Now it's important to note that FFCRA has expired, and there's currently no Texas or federal law that says the company must give paid leave for employees if they become ill with COVID or have to take care of someone with COVID. After that expiration in December 31st, 2020, the government had some sort of incentive, a tax incentive for employers who gave paid leave for COVID-related illness. But that also expired on September 30th, 2021. Right now, there's no incentive in place, and there's no requirement in place for employers to give paid leave for COVID illnesses and things like that. So what does this mean? This means that the employers and their policies basically goes back to pre-COVID times, right? So if you have a sick leave policy before or PTO policy, that's what you have to rely on in terms of whether or not you have to pay employees or things like that. So whenever they have COVID, even if you have this policy in place, I know that some companies, some employers are still willing to work with their employees and provide extra time off or extra sick leave in case they get COVID, and that kind of gives a sense of I guess good feeling for the employees, knowing that even though they're not required to, employers are still taking care of them. So that kind of helps you with your employee retention. If you're self-employed and you had to take time off in COVID prior to September 30th, 2021, then you may be eligible for a certain tax credits, things like that. Now I'm just going to go through some common issues that a lot of clients ask me in a lot of situations that they run into, and I'll just talk about a few of them. Can an employer require an employee to show proof of vaccination? Yes. Employers can generally require their employees to give proof of vaccination against COVID-19 if the employees are physically present in the workplace. Yeah, you have to watch out though, because there's a lot of employees that may ask for exemptions for religious and medical reasons. So you have to take those seriously and review their exception requests to see whether or not it's valid, to see whether or not you can give a reasonable accommodation to that employee who's asking for that exemption. Now, what are proof of vaccinations? What are samples? That can be your vaccine record from a healthcare provider or pharmacy, your copy of your vaccination record card, your medical records that show your vaccination, any records from public health, state, or tribal immunization information systems, or any other documents that show what kind of vaccine you received, the date of administration, and the name of the healthcare professional or site that gave you the vaccine. What happens if the employee loses their proof of vaccination? Then in that case, you can make the employee make a statement to the company, to the employer, that basically says what's their vaccination status, that they lost their proof of vaccination, that they understand the criminal penalties for fraud, about lying about their vaccination status, and who, when, where, and what kind of vaccine that they got to the best of their recollection. What are employers obligated to do if their employees can't take the vaccine or for qualified reasons? That means qualified reasons meaning religious or medical exemptions. If that's the case, if upon review the employee is valid for that exemption, then the employer has to provide reasonable accommodation. And that's like an overarching term that may differ depending on the position, depending on the company, and things like that. So it's whenever a company has to provide reasonable accommodation, it's a very detailed review and a very pointed assessment. What the company does, who can take over the duties, what kind of accommodations you can give this employee. Is it burdensome for the company to give such an accommodation, and things like that. So whenever that's required, I urge you to have your HR take a look at it, or reach out to a lawyer to help you review this sort of thing, because what you don't want happening is the employees coming back at you and saying that there's been a violation, an ADA violation, or civil rights violation because you aren't able to give them reasonable accommodation. So what steps can you take to screen your employees for COVID-19 besides the proof of vaccination? I mean, I'm sure the companies have already been doing this. You can continue to take temperatures and ask questions about symptoms. You can have screeners for your employees, for your clients, or whoever else comes into your office. You can require your employees to have protective gear, masks, gloves, and things like that. You can also adopt infection control practices. That means, hand washing, hand sanitizing, cleaning and sanitizing areas that a lot of people are in, or areas that are high traffic areas. So disinfecting doorknobs, handles, and things like that. That's good practice for any employer during this time. I recently read that taking temperatures might not be as effective as they thought in terms of screening, because some employees may have COVID-19 and may not have symptoms anyways. So it's important for your HR, for your company, to always be updated with regards to the most effective ways to screen for employees, or the most effective ways to prevent COVID-19 transmission. So that way you can update your procedures and policies as you go. Now, if your company requires your employee to have COVID-19 testing, do you need to pay for the employee's time that they spent undergoing that COVID-19 testing during the workday? Yes. So if you're requiring your employee to have COVID-19 testing, especially during work hours, or on your direction, especially on your premises, you still have to pay for that time that they're testing. Most employers pay sick leave to employees who are impacted by COVID-19 and the Omicron variants. I discussed this before. No, you're not mandated to pay for sick leave anymore, but you have to take a look at your policy, what you have in place, and just follow that. You take a look at what you've done before in the past. Also, make sure that this policy, your leave policy, your work from home policy, your telework policy, all that is being implemented fairly for everybody. You don't want to have certain employees say that they're being discriminated against because some employees are getting favorable treatments with regards to being able to work from home, or their team gets to work from home 100% of the time while they have to work come in 2 days a week. So I know I've had a lot of clients come to me with that issue. They have a lot of employees. They have different teams, and some teams their managers let them work from home, while some teams they have to work. They have to come in every single day. Receptionists, people at the front, they have to come in every day, while other people don't. There's a lot of questions as to is that legal? Can other people have be able to work from home while others have to come in? So to head off that type of controversy or that type of issue, you should make sure that your managers and your supervisors and your company has policy in place to make sure that there's no discrimination and everybody's treated fairly. And even if I know that some employees, they have to come into the office because that's where their work is, right? Let's say for a factory worker, you can't really do work from home. So that's also something that the company should be ready to explain to your employees whenever they make that type of complaints. Just have your reasoning in place for any policy that you have. If your employee requests reasonable accommodation for medical conditions, you can ask questions or require medical documentation for the disability or health issue that they're claiming. And if there's any reasonable accommodation, then you have to provide it. Now, religious belief is a little bit trickier because there's less kind of hard documents or less proof with regards to this accommodation. So employers when making this type of decision, they should be a lot more careful, because this one is kind of trips up employers more, because employees will be like, well, how do you know what my religious background is, or how do you know what my religious belief is, practices, observance, things like that. I would suggest, if there's anybody that's asking for this, you have outside help, attorney, or an experienced HR take a look at whatever they're asking, and whether or not they're sincere in their belief or practice. In this type of situation, sometimes it's better to play it safe than risk discrimination. I discussed this before. Employees may feel like they can say that, oh, I'm vaccinated, but I lost my vaccination card, and they may make that statement to the company saying, oh, this is when I got vaccinated, and they may be lying. It's kind of hard to catch that as an employer. All you can do is really warn employees to, if they're lying about their vaccination status, and the employer finds out, or OSHA finds out, they can be fined for more than $10,000, or imprisoned for no more than 6 months, or both. So just letting them know about the penalties for fraud under OSHA for documents like that, it may deter, it'll probably deter most employees from lying about vaccination status. So what happens now? Post Supreme Court ruling with regards to the ETS. Just proceed according to your plan pre-COVID or pre-ETS, whatever you had before, whatever procedures you had in place, you just keep going with that plan. There's no additional requirement unless you're Medicare or Medicaid facility. Just backpedal as if ETS never happened. Now, just to provide some guidance with regards to returning to work after COVID infection, the CDC in Texas, they have the CDC has a broader or an easier guideline for returning, but that doesn't mean that states or localities can have they can have their own requirements, and companies can have stricter requirements than CDC recommendations. So this is Texas's guidance for returning to work. It's just guidance. It doesn't mean you have to follow it, but it's as an employer, you should at least take a look at this and take a look at what's required, because it'll give you a lot of answers, especially when client or employees are asking you, when can I return? What should my policy be? What happens if I have COVID, I don't have PTO, I don't have sick leave, and have to stay at home and have COVID and I don't get paid? You should always just take a look at the CDC guidance and your state's guidance in terms of return to work, and that'll give you some protection from your employees claiming that you're treating them unfairly. So for the CDC guidance on December 27, 2021, they changed it to if you're infected with COVID, you should stay home for 5 days. And if you don't have symptoms, after 5 days, you can leave the house, but you should continue wearing a mask for additional 5 days. If you have a fever, you should stay at home until your fever goes away. Now, if you were exposed to someone with COVID and you've been vaccinated and boosted, you should wear a mask around others for 10 days. And if possible, test on day 5 to see if you have any, if you have COVID-19. Now, if you have symptoms, then you should stay home and follow the first guidance. If you were exposed to someone with COVID and you don't have the booster, or you're unvaccinated, or it's been a long time since you've had your vaccine, you should stay at home for 5 days and continue wearing a mask for additional 5 days. If you can't quarantine, you should wear a mask for 10 days and test on day 5 if you can. Now, just in terms of immigration laws, I know there's some programs that require employers to pay their employees the required wages, and if they don't pay the required wages, they'll get in trouble with the Department of Labor. Okay, and this kind of issue comes about because now with COVID-19 and people having to take time off and having to maybe take unpaid leave, what are the requirements saying about this sort of thing? So failure to pay, for example, H-1B is the work visa that companies get for their employees. It's one of the major programs. And under this, if you're not paying your employee because your company, for example, doesn't have business or doesn't have any contracts and things like that, then that's not allowed. You still have to pay your employees even though you don't have any business. Now, if the employee asks for a voluntary request saying can I have some personal time off, unpaid time off, and then that's okay under the H-1B laws. Now, if there's a short-term COVID-19 sickness, the company should follow its guidelines with regards to sick leave and paid time off and things like that. Now, if your employee is out for a long period of time, say a few weeks or months at a time, then companies should consider amending the H-1B with USIS to reflect the new work condition, meaning they might have to work part-time, or they might have to change duties or things like that. So it's just something to think about. So that's the presentation. I'm now going to stop my share and see if Paul has any questions and answers, questions from the audience.
Hey, thank you, Earvin. This is good stuff. A lot of good information. Yeah, there's some questions that came on the board, and I do have some questions, but let me just kind of relate the questions that came across to me. For small business, less than 100 people, right? For those who have 20, maybe say 20 people, does OSHA apply to them? Is that correct, or is that not correct? What's your stance on that?
So, I mean, just as a general guideline, I mean, even if OSHA, doesn't apply to you, just as a practical matter, you should have these policies in place anyways, just to protect your productivity and protect your employees.
Okay.
Some companies, yeah.
Go ahead. So some companies?
Yeah, some companies, I know they've had one COVID sickness, and it turned into like their entire workforce, or at least half their workforce, being out for a while. And that type of thing just ruins your morale, ruins your productivity, and it's hard. I mean, you lose 1 week or 2 week productivity. that puts you in a hole, right? So, whether or not OSHA applies to you, you should have these type of policies anyways, just as a practical matter.
Okay. No, thank you for that. Well, the other question that kind of stem to that. So if that's the case, the small business owners, they can demand the vaccines and wear masks, or else they'll be fired, right? Can they implement those things of demanding that as a small business?
Yes.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's a general yes, right? But you should always take a look at your local laws and your state laws, because with no federal guidance in place, you can have 50 states with 50 different rules in place. So always, wherever you're located, always take a look at your local guidance and your state guidance. But as a general rule, yes, you can do that.
Okay. No, thank you. I think the next question has been answered about small business owners obligated to reimburse for COVID tests. You already answered that in your presentation. One question that also came up is, say one of my employees got sick in COVID, what are some steps I can take? And also how to prevent it, because inside employees like to talk, and they sometimes will identify who has that COVID. Even though it's maybe violations of the HEPA rules and all that perspective. So how do you control this aspect of an outbreak? Any tips and advice legally, and what that of protecting your workforce?
Okay. I didn't catch the first question, but let me answer the second question first. All right. So in terms of, your employees talk, and you have HIPAA rules, and employees will talk anyways, and they'll figure out who has COVID, right? But just as a matter of policy, even if your employees find out on their own, I mean, that's not on you. But what you have to do is make sure that you protect the privacy of the information that's given to you. So for example, your employee says, I have COVID. Make sure that only the people that need to know that who the person is, needs to know. Okay, so that would be your HR, maybe the supervisor, or whoever else needs. Now, whether always keep that information as tight as possible. I mean, just let the people who need to know. And if you have any policy about reaching out to people that had close contacts, then go ahead and do that. Make sure you don't tell that person who that those people who has COVID, right? But just say, hey, you've been in close contact with someone who recently has COVID symptoms or has came down with COVID. Please go ahead and follow isolation procedures or testing procedures or things like that, right? So as a matter of responsibility, you, the company, you only have to protect it. You don't tell the employees who it is unless they need to know. Whether or not the employees find out on their own, I mean, you can't really prevent that, because it's, especially if your company has 10 people, someone's out for a week, 2 weeks. I mean, they're gonna know who has COVID, right? But just in terms of your responsibility, just make sure, the files are kept, secret, whatever medical records, they're only, HR has them, or wherever it needs to know, they're the ones that has access to it. Now, what was the first question?
Well, it kind of meant, it was about if someone had COVID, what steps should I take? You kind of answered all that perspective. You raised the interesting questions about letting the people know and then that they would isolate themselves. So say you have a workforce of 10, one person gets isolated, I guess down with COVID, they were in contact with a group of 3 people in their team. Would the other 2 people or 3 people would they, if they request for isolation, then they work from home, you can accommodate that? Is that something that you can or should do in this aspect of isolation?
So what I mean, the company has to see what works for them, right? In terms of your employees. The CDC says, have them isolate or have them wear masks at least if they're exposed to someone with COVID. But if your company is able to have these employees work from home and you're comfortable with that and they can be productive at home, then you feel free to do that, right? You got to see what works for you as an employer. On the other end, some people that have COVID, you saw the CDC guidelines say, stay at home for 5 days, wear a mask, and you're able to come back, right? And some employers are comfortable with that, and some employers aren't. Some employers may say, come back after you have a negative test, and that's okay. You got to see what works for you, and you got to see what works for your company. I mean, you have a team of 4 and one has COVID, and the other 3 might not be able to afford to have them also work from home because maybe they have job duties where they're required to be at work, right? So it's just kind of seeing what works for you, and having the policies in place, masking if possible, sanitizing and things like that to try to limit transmission as much as you can. And I mean, it's difficult. A lot of companies are having trouble with it. It's just the best thing you can do is prepare now, in case you run into it later.
Yeah, good advice in that perspective. So in preparing for that, there's some small business here who doesn't have any HR component of it. So do you have any type of resources or templates that they can do in helping them create policies for that, or any type of recommendations that you have that they can implement?
Well, number one, even if you don't have HR department or COVID policy, I mean, you could look at, what are we doing today, right? ACC is putting together an informational session, and I'm sure there's other, National ACE also has their own resources. Small business chambers, business chambers across the country, they have these type of informational sessions that you can reach out to. And, if you don't have your own department, I'm sure, you voice your concern to Paul or to ACC, and then they'll put together something for you, right? And if they have enough requests, I mean, I'm sure they can ask us to put something together, and we'll be more than glad to give you some sort of some general guidance and things like that. Besides that, you can look at Department of Labor, CDC. In Texas, they have Texas Workforce Commission. The website's pretty good in terms of giving guidance to employers that there aren't big enough to have formal HR department, things like that.
No, great question. Thank you so much. I know we're out of time. There's so many things but you cover a lot, and so thank you so much. A lot of information. I had questions that you already answered it, so I want to say thank you so much for your time. And yes, we will provide some information on that perspective, at least point you to the right places that can, and definitely Earvin there. I'm not sure if you're able to just share your contact information in case they want to reach out to further questions. You can do that in the chat box if it's okay, Earvin.
Sure.
Yeah. So just bad setting. Want to thank you so much for attending, Earvin. You did a great time with this, and we were glad that you're here. Just want to remind everyone who's on this particular presentation, we have 2 wonderful events: a networking event that we could see each other in person tomorrow at 5:30 at GALS. And then following that, next week, we're going to have our orientation for those who want to become members. I encourage you to explore the Chamber and our community partners, and as well as National ACE, about resources and opportunities to grow. We're here, and that's our purpose, is helping you as business owners to really get to level up and to grow your organizations. Please follow us on social media. You can find that on the top of our website. Thank you for spending your afternoon with us. Please reach out to the Chamber if you have questions. We'll provide all that information that Earvin will repost this as well with some follow-up information and provide that. We're happy that you're here. We hope that you attend our future events. We hope to see you tomorrow. So this concludes our webinar. Thank you, Earvin. National ACE, we recognize this whole support that you're providing, and thank you, Board Chair Kenneth, for being able to say some remarks. So enjoy your afternoon. We thank you for that. This concludes that. Enjoy your afternoon. Thank you.